All right, welcome back for another deep dive. You guys know how much we love to just get in
Yeah.
and dig into a topic.
Yeah.
And today we're diving into something that I think a lot of our listeners are really into, which is language learning.
Okay. Yeah.
Trying to pick up a new
Mm-hmm.
language. And some of you sent in some really cool research on a method
Mm-hmm.
that is kind of different. It's a different way to approach this.
Interesting.
And I am super excited to get into it with our expert. So this is called reading, speaking, listening.
Okay.
You ever heard this?
I haven't actually heard of this one before,
Right.
so I'm excited to learn.
It's definitely not the traditional listen first
Yeah.
approach.
No.
It's totally different. Um, and the research that you guys sent in says that this can get you speaking confidently faster.
That's a big claim.
Yeah, it is a big claim.
Yeah.
But what does confidence really mean when you just starting out?
That's a good question.
I mean, are we talking about sounding like a native speaker right away?
Well, not necessarily, right? I think when we're talking about confidence in this context, it's
No.
more about just feeling comfortable expressing yourself, right? So even if you make mistakes,
Right.
you're not afraid to just jump in and
Yeah.
try to use the language.
Yeah.
I think that's really what this method is going for.
Yeah.
That comfort level, from the get-go.
So walk us through how this actually works.
All right, so let's break it down. The first stage is all about reading.
Yeah.
And you can think of this like gathering your building blocks. So it's about vocabulary, grammar, sentence structure, all of those fundamental elements of language.
Right.
And you're immersing yourself in the written form, first and foremost.
Okay.
And then this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
You jump straight into speaking.
Wait a minute. So you're reading and then immediately trying to speak.
Exactly, yeah.
I could already picture myself like fumbling through these basic phrases
Mm-hmm.
and sounding like a robot.
But that's kind of the point, right? It's about putting that knowledge into action immediately. You're reinforcing what you just learned. And this is based on a principle called output forcing.
Output forcing.
Have you heard of that one? It basically means you're pushing yourself to produce the language, even if it's messy at first. And this can actually help speed up the learning process.
Okay, so I see the logic there. But how does this method address pronunciation?
Hmm.
Rhythm, all those subtle nuances.
Right, the things that make language sound natural.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a really good question.
It's like you wouldn't try to play a concerto before you've ever heard how it's supposed to sound.
Right. You need that reference point. And that brings us to the final stage.
Yeah.
Which is listening.
Okay.
But this isn't just passive listening. It's about actively paying attention to how native speakers pronounce words, the intonation, the rhythm. It's like finally getting to hear that concerto and noticing all the details you might have missed if you just tried to play it yourself
Right.
without ever listening. So maybe this method is a good fit for people who learn best visually,
That's a good point. Yeah.
people who want to see the structure of a language before they hear it.
Absolutely. And for someone who's maybe felt a little intimidated by those traditional listening heavy approaches, this
Yeah.
could be a less overwhelming way to start.
Yeah. So to sum this up for you, dear listener, if you're aiming for fluency and you don't mind jumping into conversations, even before you sound perfect, this method might be for you.
I think so.
But if nailing that perfect accent is your priority, you might want to think about adding in more listening earlier in the process.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And here's a final thought for you. How might this reading, speaking, listening method work differently depending on the language you're learning?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Are some languages more reliant on specific sounds or tonal variations that might influence how much emphasis you need to place on the listening stage?
That's a great point to end on. So we've given you just a taste of this unique approach to language learning. But just like with any learning method, the key is to find what works best for you
Yeah.
and the language that you're tackling. So keep diving deeper. And thank you for joining us on this exploration.